I was 12 the summer. Mama decided the moon was right for fixing what ailed her, and she dragged me and my sister Ruth up the holler to Granny's old place like we was sacks of feed she couldn't leave behind. Ruth was 14 all along. Legs and freckles, always humming some hymn under her breath even when the trail got so steep the rocks cut through our shoes. Mama never said exactly what needed fixing, just that. Granny's book had the words, and the clearing behind the cabin had the power. The cabin itself sagged like it was tired of standing. Roof patched with rusted tin that rattled whenever the wind came down off the ridge. Inside smelled of wood smoke and the sharp tang of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Bundles of boneset and yarrow that brushed my hair when I ducked through the door. Granny had been gone 3 winters by then, but her rocking chair still faced the hearth, and sometimes I swore it moved just enough to creak. We waited 3 nights for the moon to swell full and yellow, hanging over the pines like a lantern somebody forgot to snuff. Mama kept us busy, sent us to the creek for water, made us scrub the clay from under our nails, told us to hush when we asked too many questions. Ruth whispered to me after dark that Mama was scared, that her hand shook when she thought nobody was looking. I didn't believe it until the 3rd night when Mama sat on the porch step staring at the sky like it might speak back. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I caught the words anyway, Granny's name, over and over, like a prayer or a curse. The clearing lay a 1/4 mile behind the cabin, a bowl of packed earth ringed by laurel so thick the moonlight barely touched the ground. Mama carried the birch bark page folded small in her apron pocket, the ink faded but still dark enough to read if you held it close. She made us gather the lamb bones from the smokehouse, tiny ribs and knuckles from a stillborn twin Granny had buried under the apple tree years before. The bones were dry and light, clicking together like dice when Ruth dropped them into the flour sack. Mama drew the circle with creek clay mixed with a pinch of salt, her finger tracing slow and steady while she muttered under her breath. The air smelled of wet pine and something sharper, like iron left out in the rain. I remember thinking the ground felt warm, even through my bare feet, like the earth had a fever. We set the bones in the center, arranged them the way the bark said, spine curved north, skull facing the moon. Mama lit the single candle stub, tallow yellow and stinking of sheep. The flame stood straight at first, then bent toward the bones as if something breathed on it. Ruth and I knelt opposite each other, knees in the dirt, while Mama stood at the circle's edge and began to read. Her voice was low, the words old and twisted, nothing like the Bible verses she made us memorize. They tasted wrong in my mouth when she made me repeat them, like licking a penny. The fire we'd built earlier small, just enough to see by, danced higher with every line, sparks jumping farther than they had any right to. Ruth's eyes got wide, but she didn't stop chanting. She never was one to back down. The shadows changed first. They thickened between the trees, folding in on themselves until the night had edges sharp enough to cut. I felt it in my chest before I saw it a pressure, like the air was turning to water. The candle flame stretched tall, then split into 2, then 3, flickering images I couldn't make sense of. Mama's voice cracked on the last word, and for a heartbeat everything went still. Even the crickets quit. Ruth leaned forward to snuff the candle. She said later she thought the rite was done, that Mama had nodded, but her knee slid across the chalk line. Just an inch, maybe less. The chalk flared white, bright as lightning, frozen mid-flash. Something grabbed her ankle from underneath the ground, fingers cold and thin as fence wire. Ruth screamed, a sound I still hear when the wind rattles the windows, and then she was gone. Not fell, not pulled down, gone, like the circle swallowed whole. The chalk line sealed behind her, smooth as pond ice after a hard freeze. The candle went out. The fire sank to embers. Mama stood there with her mouth open, birch bark fluttering from her fingers like a white moth. I ran. Don't remember deciding to. Just felt my legs go and the thorns ripping at my calves. The path back to the cabin was darker than I'd ever seen it. Branches slapping my face, roots snaking up to trip me. I burst through the door and slammed it behind me, chest heaving, blood running warm down my shins. The house was quiet, too quiet. I lit the kerosene lamp with shaking hands, and that's when I saw the first mirror. Ruth's face pressed against the glass from the inside, eyes wide, mouth moving slow. My name, over and over. No sound, but I felt it in my bones. I screamed for Mama, but she didn't come. The mirror in the bedroom showed the same Ruth's hands flat against the glass, fog blooming where her breath should be. I smashed that one with the coal shovel, shards raining like ice. But the pieces on the floor still held her reflection, tiny fractured Ruths mouthing my name from every angle. I swept them into the hearth and watched them blacken, but the smell of wet clay followed me to bed. Mama found me at dawn, curled under the kitchen table, lamp burned dry. She didn't speak, just wrapped me in Granny's quilt and rocked me like I was still small. Her eyes were red but dry. We never went back to the clearing. She burned the birch bark in the cook stove, but the smoke hung in the house for days, thick and sweet, like incense at a funeral. Folks in the holler said we was cursed, that Mama had meddled with things best left buried. She didn't deny it. Just took to sitting on the porch every full moon, staring up the trail like she expected Ruth to come walking down with dirt in her hair. The mirrors kept showing her for years. Not every day, sometimes months would pass, and I'd think it was over. Then I'd catch a glimpse in the well bucket or the window glass at twilight, Ruth older now, hair longer, eyes sadder. She never looked angry, just lost. I stopped looking in mirrors altogether, covered them with flour sacks, or turned them to the wall. Mama died the winter I turned 20. Heart give out while she was shelling beans. I found her slumped in the rocker, face turned toward the window like she'd seen something coming up the path. I left the holler after that, moved down to Knoxville and took a job in the textile mill. Thought distance might break whatever held Ruth. It didn't. She found new glass car windows, shop displays, the black screen of the television after the late movie signed off. Always the same, pressed close, mouthing my name. I started drinking. Cheap whiskey that burned but didn't quiet the sound of her voice in my head. Got married once to a quiet man who worked the line beside me. He left when he woke to find me staring at the dresser mirror at 3 in the morning, whispering to someone he couldn't see. Said the room felt colder than the walk-in freezer at the market. 30 years now since that night in the clearing. I'm back in the holler, living in Granny's cabin because the city got too loud and the mirrors there were too many. The roof still leaks, the herbs are long gone, but the rocking chair faces the hearth, same as always. I keep one mirror uncovered, the small one over the washstand. Ruth is there every morning, hair white now, face lined like mine. She doesn't mouth my name anymore. Just watches, patient as stone. Last full moon I walked up to the clearing alone. The laurel had grown wild, but the bowl of earth was still there, chalk line faint but unbroken. I carried a trowel and a mason jar of creek water. Knelt where Ruth had knelt and poured the water slow, watching it soak in. The ground drank it greedy. I dug a little, just enough to see the clay beneath, still warm. Something moved under my fingers, soft, like a pulse. I jerked back, hard hammering, but nothing came up. Just the smell of wet pine and iron, same as before. I still wake some nights with clay on my pillow, damp and cool. Sometimes I hear footsteps on the porch, light, like a child's. I don't open the door, don't need to. I know who's waiting on the other side of the glass, patient as the moon, calling me home. Back in the fall of '89, the leaves turned early, blood red and brittle, dropping off the maples like they couldn't stand another season. Our little farm sat at the end of a dirt track that washed out every spring. Just me and Harlan and the cows that barely gave enough milk to cover the feed bill. Harlan had always liked his corn liquor, but that year he took to it hard coming in after dark, with liquor on his breath and bruises on his knuckles from fights at the roadhouse down in Switchback. I'd sing to him while I cooked, old hymns my mama taught me, voice soft enough to smooth the edges off his temper. He'd lean in the doorway, eyes half closed, and for a minute the house felt like it used to. Then the bottle would call louder than I ever could. I tried everything, hid the keys to his truck, poured out what I found, begged on my knees in the kitchen with grease popping in the skillet. Nothing stuck. One night he came home meaner than a stepped-on snake, backhanded me so hard I saw stars against the ceiling beams. I tasted blood and knew something had to give. Next morning I walked the 3 miles to the crossroads where the old oak leans over the road like it's listening. Folks said a woman in a black shawl showed up there when the light was thin, trading fixes for pieces of yourself. I didn't believe it, not really, but desperation makes its own kind of faith. She was already waiting when I got there, dusk bleeding purple across the sky. Tall, rail-thin, face hidden under that shawl except for a mouth too wide and eyes the color of creek ice. She didn't speak at first, just held out her hand. I gave her the silver thimble I'd carried in my pocket since I was 10 Granny's thimble, the only thing of value I owned besides my wedding ring. She turned it over once, then tucked it away. From her skirt, she pulled a briar thorn long as my little finger and a mason jar clean as Sunday glass. "Open," she said, voice like wind through dead leaves. I did. She pricked my tongue quick, caught the drops in the jar 3, 4, 5, then stoppered it and shook. The blood swirled slow, clouding the glass like breath on a cold pane. She whispered words I didn't know, syllables that scraped the inside of my skull. When she handed me the charm, a knot of red thread and a single black feather, I felt lighter, like something had already gone missing. That night my throat closed up tight as a clenched fist. I opened my mouth to call Harlan for supper, and nothing came but a rasp, dry as corn shucks. Panic clawed at me. I clawed at my neck, but the skin was smooth, no swelling, no bruise. Harlan laughed at first, thought I was putting on. teasing him sober. Then he saw my eyes and the laugh died. He touched the charm tied around his neck with the same red thread, fingers trembling. "It'll be all right, Lila," he said, but his voice shook too. I nodded, wrote on the chalkboard we used for grocery lists, "Just a cold." He kissed my forehead, gentle for once, and went to bed early without a drop. The next weeks were strange and quiet. Harlan didn't touch the bottle. He fixed the loose board on the porch, milked the cows before I woke, even hummed while he split firewood. I tried to sing once, just to hear myself, and felt the air scrape raw in my chest. Only whispers came, thin as spider silk. I told myself it was worth it. The house smelled of coffee instead of whiskey, and Harlan's eyes were clear when he looked at me. But then he started hearing things. It began with murmurs in the walls at night. He'd sit bolt upright in bed, sweat shining on his forehead. "You hear that, Lila?" he'd whisper. I'd shake my head, frantic, but he'd stare at the plaster like it might open up. "My voice," he said, my singing voice, calling him a drunk, a fool, a dead man walking. I wrote on the board, "It ain't me." He'd read it, nod slow, but the next night it was worse. He took to pacing the floorboards till they groaned, following the sound from room to room. I followed too, barefoot and useless, watching his face twist with every word only he could hear. One evening I found him in the barn, rope coiled in his hands like a pet snake. The charm still hung at his throat, feather fluttering though there was no wind. "It's in the hayloft now," he said, voice hollow, "telling me how I ruined you, how I ain't worth the dirt under your feet." Tears cut clean tracks through the dust on his cheeks. I grabbed the rope, tried to pull it away, but he was stronger even sober. I scratched at his arm, leaving red furrows, and he looked at me like he'd never seen me before. "I'm sorry, Lila," he whispered, and I knew. I woke before dawn to the sound of the barn door banging. The bed beside me was cold. I ran out in my nightgown, dew soaking the hem, and found him swinging slow from the crossbeam. The rope was the same one I'd used to tie the charm, my best clothesline, sun-bleached and strong. His boots barely cleared the straw, turning lazy circles. The charm lay on the floor beneath him, thread snapped, feather crushed. I cut him down with the hay knife, hands slick with his blood and mine where the blade slipped. He was still warm when I held him, but his eyes stared past me at something I couldn't see. I screamed then, or tried to, only that dry rasp came over and over, until the crows answered from the fence posts. They buried him in the churchyard down the holler. Preachers saying words about weakness and forgiveness. I stood mute at the grave, throat raw from trying. Folks patted my shoulder, brought casseroles that went cold on the table. I nodded thanks, wrote on whatever paper I could find, "Appreciate IT." After a while they stopped coming. The farm ran itself into the ground cows sold cheap, fields gone to briar and goldenrod. I kept the house, kept the silence. Some nights I walked to the crossroads, mason jar in my apron pocket, hoping the woman would come back to undo it. She never did. Years passed like creek water over stones. I took in sewing, lived on what the garden gave and the eggs from 3 scrawny hens. My hands stayed busy so my mind wouldn't. Then one spring cleaning, I climbed the attic stairs for the first time since Harlan died. Dust floated thick in the single bulb's light, and there on a shelf behind Mama's old trunk sat the mason jar. Still half full, blood thick as sorghum, moving slow against the glass like it had somewhere to be. I carried it down careful, set it on the kitchen table where the afternoon sun struck it red. My finger traced the rim, and the cork came out easy as breathing. The voice poured out my voice, but older, meaner, edged with every bitter thing I'd never said. It filled the room, wrapped around my neck like smoke made solid. "You think you're better now?" It hissed, close as my own heartbeat. "You killed him same as if you'd knotted the rope yourself." I clawed at my throat, but there was nothing to grab. The jar tipped, blood spilling across the oilcloth, soaking in dark. The voice kept talking, listing every failure, every lie, every time I'd looked away when Harlan needed me most. I stumbled outside, fell to my knees in the yard, and it followed, echoing off the barn, the trees, the empty sky. I don't sing anymore, don't speak if I can help it. The whisper comes and goes, thin as ever. But sometimes late at night, I hear the other voice in the walls again, Harlan's, calling my name soft like he used to when the drink hadn't got him yet. I sit in the rocker by the cold stove and listen, afraid to answer, afraid not to. The mason jar's back in the attic, corked tight, but I know what's inside ain't done with me. Some debts don't die with the debtor. They just wait, patient as winter, for the right throat to open. The winter of '78 hit us like a hammer. Snow piling so deep the mail truck quit coming and the creek froze solid, enough to walk across if you didn't mind the crack under your boots. I was 15, stuck in Aunt Clara's cabin up on Piney Knob because Mama had taken sick down in Charleston and there wasn't room for me in the city apartment. Clara never married, never wanted kids. But blood's blood, and she took me in with a grunt and a nod toward the lean-to where I could sleep. The cabin was small, 2 rooms and a loft, walls chinked with moss gone gray, windows filmed with frost that never quite melted. Heat came from the potbelly stove in the front room, fed with hickory we split ourselves. Clara kept to her rocker, knitting scarves nobody bought, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. On the mantel above the stove sat the corn-husk doll-faded yellow dress, black button eyes, mouth stitched in red thread like a permanent smile. Clara said her own aunt made it back before the war, said it listened better than people and kept the loneliness out. I hated the quiet at first. No radio, no neighbors closer than a mile, just the wind whirring the tin roof and the stove ticking as it cooled. Clara spoke when she had to pass the salt, fetch more wood, but mostly she hummed under her breath, tunes I didn't know. After a week, I took to talking to the doll because it was there and didn't talk back. I'd sit cross-legged on the rug after chores, snow hissing against the window, and spill whatever came to mind. Started small, how I'd stolen a nickel from the church collection when I was 8, how I'd lied to Mama about breaking her good teacup. The doll just stared, head tilted a little like it was leaning in. Felt good to say it out loud, like lancing a boil. Clara never noticed. She'd be asleep in her rocker, chin on her chest, knitting needles still. The confessions grew. I told it about kissing Tommy Wheeler behind the schoolhouse, how his hands shook under my sweater. Told it I'd cheated on the algebra test, copied answers off Sarah Ann's paper. told it I sometimes wished Mama would stay sick so I wouldn't have to go home. The words tasted sour, but the doll took them, button eyes steady. Snow kept falling, days blurring into white. I started leaving the loft door open so I could see it on the mantel from my cot, a small pale shape in the dark. One night I woke to the stove popping and saw the doll's head turned all the way toward the ladder, like it had twisted on its own. I told myself the heat did it, wood swelling. But my stomach went cold. Next morning Clara was out feeding the chickens and I went to stoke the fire. The doll wasn't on the mantel. I found it on my pillow in the loft, dress smooth neat, button eyes looking up at the rafters. My heart kicked hard. I carried it back downstairs, set it where it belonged. But my hands shook so bad I dropped the poker and it clanged loud enough to wake the dead. Clara came in with snow on her boots, took one look at my face and asked what was wrong. I wrote on the chalkboard we used for lists. Nothing. She grunted, went back outside. That night I tied the doll to the mantel with twine so it couldn't wander. Woke at dawn to find the twine knotted around my wrist instead. Loose enough to slip off, but tight enough to leave marks. I burned it the next day. Clara had gone to trade eggs for coffee down at the valley store, road barely passable. I waited till the truck's rumble faded, then carried the doll to the stove. It felt heavier than corn husks had any right to, warm like skin. I opened the door, coals glowing red, and dropped it in. The flames took quick, dress curling black, button eyes popping with little cracks. Smelled like burning hair. I watched till there was nothing left but ash, then closed the damper and swept the hearth clean. Felt lighter, almost laughed at myself for being spooked by a toy. The ashes wouldn't stay put. By evening they'd drifted into a shape on the stones, my name, letters thin and perfect. I swept again, harder, but the next morning it was back, darker, like the soot had soaked into the stone. Clara noticed that time. "Wind must have blowed em," she said, but her eyes lingered. I started hearing whispers when I was alone, soft, childlike, repeating things I'd told the doll. At first, just in the cabin, then outside when I fetched wood. Tommy's name, the teacup, the church nickel. I'd spin around, axe in hand, but there was only snow and bare trees. Town was a 3-mile walk when the snow let up enough. I went for flour and salt, boots crunching the crust. Old Mrs. McCoy at the store greeted me same as always, then leaned close and said, "Heard you been kissin' behind the schoolhouse girl. Tongues'll wag." My stomach dropped. She smiled like it was gossip, not confession. On the way out, Mr. Jenkins tipped his hat and murmured, "That teacup was your mama's favorite, wasn't it?" I ran most of the way home, pack bouncing, breath burning. Clara was rocking when I burst in, face pale. "They know," I rasped. She still thought I'd lost my voice to a cold. She just nodded slow, eyes on the hearth where my name sat in ash again. I stopped talking altogether. Wrote notes when I had to, burned them after. But the whispers followed through the walls at night, in the barn when I milked the cow, even in my head when I tried to pray. Clara took sick not long after, cough deep in her chest, fever burning her up. I nursed her best I could, broth and willow bark tea, but she faded quick. Last night she grabbed my wrist, fingers hot as brands. "It ain't the doll," she whispered, voice like paper. "It's what you gave it." Then she was gone. eyes fixed on the mantel where nothing sat but dust. I buried her in the family plot behind the cabin. Ground hard as iron. Spring came slow, snow melting into mud that sucked at my boots. The whispers got louder, clearer my own voice but younger, reciting every secret like a litany. Folks in town crossed the street when they saw me coming. Children pointed and giggled, repeating things no child should know. I nailed the loft door shut, slept on the floor by the stove, but the ashes kept forming my name, sometimes Clara's too. I tried salting the hearth, pouring holy water I'd saved from Easter. Nothing helped. One night the wind howled fit to tear the roof off, and I woke to tiny fingers at my lips. Cold, dry, strong for their size. They pried my mouth open gentle but sure, and something soft pushed in corn silk maybe, or hair whispering all the while. I gagged, thrashed, but the fingers held firm till whatever it was settled deep in my throat. Then they were gone. I coughed till my ribs ached, but nothing came up. My voice returned the next morning, clear as when I was 10, but the words weren't mine anymore. I don't go to town now. The cabin's mine alone, stove cold most days because I can't stand a hearth. I talk to the walls sometimes, tell them new secrets, just to hear them echo back in that child voice. The ashes still spell my name when the fire's lit, letters perfect every time. Some mornings I find corn silk on my pillow, damp with dew though the windows are shut tight. I keep the loft door nailed, but the nails work loose overnight. Haven't climbed up to see what waits there. Don't need to. I feel it watching from the rafters, patient as winter, listening better than people ever did. The summer of '93 was dry as bone, creek running low, and the garden wilting no matter how much I hauled from the well. Our place sat on the backside of Laurel Ridge, a clapboard house with a tin roof that popped in the heat, barn out back leaning like it might give up any day. I was 22, home from the community college because Daddy's lungs were failing and somebody had to keep the farm from sliding into ruin. My brother Caleb was 19, all elbows and grin, still believing he could outrun the holler if he just got fast enough. He spent his days fixing fences and his nights sneaking off to the creek with a jug and whatever girl would follow. Mama said he'd settle when the right one came along. I figured the right one would have to catch him first. The barn held everything. We hadn't thrown out since Grandpa dyed rusted plows, jars of nails, a cradle Mama rocked us in. I went out there one afternoon hunting for the good axe, the one with the hickory handle Daddy swore by. Sunlight slanted through the cracks, dust floating thick, and there in the far corner stood a cheval mirror taller than me, framed dark wood carved with symbols worn smooth by hands or time. A sheet of canvas covered it, gray with age. I pulled the cloth away and the glass stared back, clear as spring water. My reflection looked tired hair in a braid, overalls streaked with dirt. But behind me, the barn was wrong. The stalls were empty, hayloft sagging, and in the middle of the floor a mound of fresh red dirt, shovel stuck upright like a cross. I was standing over it, hands blistered and bleeding, face blank as a wanted poster. I laughed at first, nervous sound that echoed off the rafters. Trick of the light, I told myself, sun hitting the glass at an angle, dust motes playing shadows. I dragged a mirror into the yard to clean it proper, thinking Mama might like it in the front room. Soap and water brought out the grain in the wood, but the carving stayed stubborn, curls and slashes that hurt to look at too long. When I tilted it to catch the breeze, the image came again, me over the grave, only now the dirt was higher, rounded like a belly. I dropped the rag and backed away, heart thumping loud in my ears. Caleb came around the corner then, whistling, and asked what I was gawking at. I pointed, but he just saw him with a smirk, me pale as milk. "You need a drink of water, sis," he said, and clapped my shoulder. That night I dreamed of digging. The shovel bit easy into clay, each scoop heavier than the last. Sweat stung my eyes, but I couldn't stop. The hole grew deep, sides slick, and when I looked up the moon was red as the dirt. Something shifted at the bottom pail, curled tight. I woke gasping, sheets twisted around my legs. The mirror stood in the hall where I'd left it, moonlight striping the floor. My reflection stared back, but the grave was there behind me, empty now, waiting. Caleb didn't come home the next morning. He'd said something about checking the upper pasture, maybe fishing the deep hole where the trout hid. I waited till noon, then saddled the mule and rode the trail. Heat shimmered off the rocks, cicadas screaming in the laurel. Found his hat snagged on a blackberry vine, sweat-stained and torn. Called his name till my throat raw, but the ridge swallowed the sound. Daddy coughed himself awake and wanted to know what the ruckus was. I told him Caleb was late. He waved a thin hand, "Boys will be boys," and went back to sleep. I saddled. Again at dusk, took the lantern, though the moon was near full. The trail narrowed, pine needles muffling the mule's hooves. Smelled water and something sharper, like turned earth. 3 days we searched me. Daddy when he could stand. Neighbors with dogs that wouldn't track past a certain point. The dogs whined and circled, tails tucked. On the third evening I rode alone, lantern low, following a hunch I couldn't name. The mirror's image burned behind my eyes. Found the spot just off the old logging road, a clearing no bigger than our kitchen. Fresh dirt mounted red and raw. Shovel blade stuck deep. My hands knew the feel before I touched it, blisters already rising. I dug like a woman possessed, clay flying, breath sobbing. The hole opened slow, sides damp. Caleb lay at the bottom, curled tight as a seed, eyes wide to the sky. No blood, no marks, just gone. Like he'd lain down to rest, and the earth took him gentle dot, we buried him proper in the family plot, preacher reading over the casket, while Mama keened into her apron. I stood dry-eyed, hands bandaged where the shovel had bitten. Folks said he must have fallen, hit his head, crawled into the hole confused. I nodded, said nothing about the mirror. That night I took the axe to it in the barn. Glass shattered sweet, shards singing as they fell. I swept them into a feed sack, buried it under the corn crib, but the pieces found their way back. Morning. Light showed them scattered across the floor, each fragment holding the same picture, the grave empty, shovel waiting, my face older now, eyes hollow. Dreams came every night after. I'd stand at the edge of the hole, shovel heavy, dirt piling higher. Sometimes Caleb watched from the trees, mouth moving silent. Sometimes the grave was wider, long enough for two. I woke tasting clay, fingers cramped around nothing. Daddy lasted another month, lungs filling slow till he drowned in bed. I closed his eyes, dug the plot myself beside Caleb, The shovel felt right in my hands, like it had been waiting. Years slid by. I kept the farm alone, sold the cows when the work got hard, lived on garden truck and what the woods gave. The mirror shards moved with me under the porch, in the smokehouse, once in the well bucket glinting up through the water. Always the same image, grave empty, me waiting. I stopped looking in windows after dark, covered the dresser mirror with a quilt. But the dreams grew sharper. I'd wake with dirt under my nails, boots muddy though I'd locked the door. Last full moon I walked the trail again, lantern unlit. The clearing was grown over, but I found the spot by feel earth softer, grass thinner. Knelt and pressed my palm to the dirt, warm like a heartbeat. The shovel leaned against a pine where I'd left it years before, handle smooth from my grip. I started digging slow, each scoop a memory, Caleb's laugh, Daddy's cough, Mama's keening. The hole opened willing, side straight. Dawn found me shoulder deep, clay streaked across my face. I climbed out, looked down. The bottom was empty, red walls gleaming. My reflection stared back from the wet earth, older, eyes tired. The shovel waited beside me, patient as stone. I don't sleep much now. Sit on the porch with the lantern low, listening to the ridge breathe. Sometimes I hear digging in the distance, steady rhythm like a heartbeat. My hands ache even when I rest them. The clearing calls on quiet nights, earth warm and ready. I keep the shovel oiled, blade sharp. Haven't decided yet whose grave comes next, but the mirror knows. It always did. The spring of '97 came in wet and slow, rain drumming the tin roof of our little house like fingers that wouldn't quit. The place sat on the edge of the national forest, a mile of muddy track from the nearest neighbor. Pines so thick the sun only touched the yard in patches. I was 20, working the lunch shift at the diner in town, coming home to Jesse, who fixed logging trucks and couldn't stay put. He'd disappear for days hunting, he said, or helping a buddy, then roll in smelling of wood smoke and somebody else's perfume. I'd forgive him because his smile still lit the room, because when he was home he'd pull me close and hum against my neck like I was the only song he knew. But the leaving wore grooves in my heart, deeper each time. Granny lived up the hollow in a cabin older than the county, smoke curling from her chimney even in summer. She'd raised me after Mama ran off, taught me to read the weather in the clouds, to set a bone, to tie knots that held more than rope. One evening I walked the deer path to her place, boots squelching, dress soaked to the knees. She was on the porch shelling beans, rocker creaking slow. I sat without asking and told her about Jesse, the way he'd promised to stay, then be gone before the coffee cooled. Granny didn't look up, just snapped beans into the bowl. Some folks need tetherin', she said, voice dry as the husks. But tetherin' takes a piece of you. She went inside and came back with a length of red cord, soft as silk, and a pair of scissors that caught the lamplight sharp. 9 knots, she said. 1 for each promise he broke. Hair from his head, buried where he steps. But mind the cost. I clipped a lock of Jesse's hair while he slept, dark curls against the pillow, breath warm on my wrist. He stirred but didn't wake. Granny showed me the pattern knot, breath, knot, name spoken soft. I worked by candlelight in her cabin, the cord growing heavy in my hands. Each knot pulled something loose inside me, like tugging a thread from a sweater. When the 9th was tied, the ladder felt warm, pulsing faint. Granny wrapped it in brown paper, eyes serious. "Bury it under the threshold. Don't dig it up, no matter what." I nodded, throat tight, and walked home through the dark with the bundle against my chest. The porch step was the third one, loose board I'd been meaning to nail. I pried it up with the claw hammer, earth beneath damp and black. Dropped the ladder in, covered it quick, tamped the dirt with my heel. The board went back crooked but held. That night Jesse came home early, truck rattling up the track before sunset. He stepped over the threshold and stopped, eyes glassy like he'd been drinking, but his breath was clean. "Delia," he said, my name soft and repeated, over and over, like a prayer or a question. He pulled me close, hand steady for once, and didn't let go till morning. The first days were sweet. Jesse woke before me, coffee perked, eggs frying. He fixed the porch step proper, humming while he worked. At night he held me like he was afraid I'd vanish. I told myself the knots were working, that Granny knew her craft. But small things nagged my shadow in the lamplight, stretched longer than it should, edges blurry. I'd turn quick and it lagged, slow to follow. Jesse didn't notice, just kept saying my name, softer each time, like he was wearing it out. A week in, the shadow stopped matching altogether. I'd walk to the clothesline and feel it drag behind, heavy as wet rope. In the mirror, it pulled at my feet, darker, while Jesse's clung close to him like a dog. I started avoiding sunlight, keeping curtains drawn. One morning I went to the creek for water, bucket swinging, and realized halfway there I'd left my shadow on the kitchen floor. Looked back, and there it was black on the pine boards, stretching toward the table where Jesse sat drinking coffee. He didn't see, just stared into his cup, lips moving silent. I ran back hard hammering, but when I crossed the threshold, the shadow snapped to my heels, like it had been waiting. That night, the floorboards started creaking, though we were both in bed. Slow steps, deliberate, from the porch to the kitchen and back. Jesse slept through it, arm heavy across my waist. I lay stiff, listening to the wood groan in patterns, 3 steps, pause, 3 more. Like someone pacing who didn't know the house. I got up once, barefoot, and followed the sound to the front room. Moonlight striped the floor through the blinds, and there in the silver my shadow moved alone, sliding across the boards toward the bedroom. I whispered its name, my name, but it didn't stop. Slipped under the door and was gone. Jesse changed after that. Still said my name, but hollow now, eyes fixed on nothing. He'd stand at the window for hours, staring at the porch step. I'd ask what he saw, and he'd blink slow, say home. The creaking never stopped, day or night, always the same rhythm. I took to sleeping on the couch, blanket over my head, but the steps followed, softer, like they were learning the floor. One dawn I woke to find Jesse gone from bed. Found him in the kitchen, barefoot, staring at the boards. His shadow was wrong too long, knotted around his ankles like rope. He turned when I gasped, face slack. "It's time," he said, voice mine but deeper, and took a step toward the porch dot. I grabbed his arm, felt the cold through his shirt. "Jesse, stay inside." He looked at me like he was seeing through water, then pulled free, gentle but sure. The floor creaked under him, louder, and I saw it my shadow uncoiling from his feet, dark threads wrapping tighter. He opened the door and stepped out, sunrise painting the yard gold. I followed to the threshold, but couldn't cross, like the air turned solid. Jesse walked to the porch step, knelt, and started digging with his hands. Dirt flew black, the board already pried loose. The ladder came up wet and pulsing, knots tighter than I'd tied them. He held it to his chest, eyes rolling back, and the shadow surged mine, his, something else wrapping him whole. The porch boards groaned, split, and he sank slow, like the house swallowed him gentle. Last thing I saw was his hand reaching up, fingers brushing the step. Then nothing but red clay smoothing over. The house went quiet after. No creaking, no humming, just wind in the pines. I nailed the board down, poured concrete over it come fall, but the step still sags when I cross. My shadow's mine again, sharp in sunlight. But sometimes in the house it stretches wrong, pools and corners where the light don't reach. I don't say Jesse's name anymore feels like tempting what's left. Some nights I wake to the smell of damp earth, feel the cord warm against my skin though I burned the ladder years ago. The porch step waits patient, and I wonder whose shadow will lag next time I tie a knot I can't undo. The winter Mama died was the coldest I ever knew, wind knifing through the gaps in the cabin walls and the stove barely keeping the frost off the windows. Our place sat high on the north slope of Clinch Mountain, a 2-room box my granddaddy built from poplar and stubborn hope. The nearest road a mule track that turned to slot by March. Mama had wasted slow that fall, lungs filling till every breath rattled like beans in a jar. I nursed her best I could willow tea, quilts warmed at the fire, my hand in hers while she stared at the rafters like she saw something moving there. When she passed it was quiet, just a sigh and the room suddenly too big. I closed her eyes, wrapped her in the wedding ring quilt, and buried her out back under the cedar where the ground stayed soft. Snow started before I finished, flakes fat and silent, covering the mound like a promise nobody asked for. Folks down in the valley said hain'ts walk when the dead ain't settled, especially if the burying's rushed. I didn't hold much with talk, but that first night alone, the cabin felt wrong creaks in places that never creaked, cold spots that moved when I turned my back. I woke more than once sure someone stood at the foot of the bed, breath fogging the air though the stove glowed red. By the third night I couldn't take it. I remembered Mama's granny swearing by salt lines, said they kept the restless out same as a locked door. I fetched the crock of rock salt we used for curing hams, poured a thick circle around the iron bedstead, grains crunching under my knees. The line closed perfect, no gaps, and I crawled under the quilts feeling foolish but lighter. Slept hard for the first time since Mama took sick, woke to gray light and the circle broken. Salt scattered in a wide arc, like something had danced through it joyful and careless. My heart kicked. I sat up slow, eyes on the floor. Bare footprints, small, narrow, a child started at the window, crossed the puncheon boards, and stopped dead at the edge of the bed. Toes pointed toward me, pressed deep as if the wood was soft. The window latch was still thrown, glass filmed with frost, no mark on the sill. I swept the salt into the stove, watched it spark blue, and told myself a rat or a coon had got in somehow. But the prints were too clean, too human. That day I kept busy, chopped extra wood, hauled water, patched the chinking where the wind whistled. Dusk came early. sky the color of a bruise. I poured a new circle, thicker this time, using the last of the rock salt. Added a pinch of the consecrated kind the preacher left after Mama's service, though I wasn't sure it counted if I didn't believe. Crawled into bed with the .22 under the pillow, quilt to my chin. The stove settled with pops and sighs. Outside the wind worried the pines. I drifted off counting heartbeats. The taste woke me copper, sharp on my tongue like I'd bit my cheek. The room was dark, fire burned to coals, but the salt line glowed faint, grains shifting though nothing touched them. Footprints again, deeper now, leading from window to circle and back, a restless path worn into the salt. The prince stopped inside the circle this time, right at the bedside, toes inches from the mattress. Something had stood there, heavy enough to crush the grains flat. I reached for the rifle slow, but my hand met empty air. The gun was gone. A soft scrape came from under the bed, wood on wood, patient. I didn't sleep after that. Sat in the rocker with Mama's Bible open on my lap, though I couldn't read a word, eyes on the circle. Dawn showed the prints filled in, salt smoothed like no one had walked there at all. I patched the line with table salt from the kitchen, coarse and gray, pouring till my wrists ached. The window stayed latched, but frost feathered the inside of the glass in the shape of a small hand. I nailed a board over it, hammer echoing loud in the quiet. The second night the air tasted thicker, copper and wet leaves. I lay rigid inside the fresh circle, shotgun across my chest this time. The stove ticked, wind moaned, then footsteps soft, deliberate, starting at the door. Not the window now. They crossed the room, boards groaning under weight that grew with each step. The salt hissed where the feet touched, grains jumping like fleas. The prince led to the circle, pressed deep, then stopped. Something breathed on the other side of the line, slow and warm. I smelled milk and grave dirt. The shotgun trembled in my hands, but I couldn't lift it, arms heavy as if the air turned to sorghum. The breathing circled slow, testing, then faded. When I dared look, the prince continued out the door, deeper still. The last one crushing the salt flat dot morning came pale. The circle was perfect again, table salt gleaming, but I stood outside it barefoot in my nightgown, looking in. Myself lay on the bed, eyes closed, chest rising slow. I opened my mouth to scream, and no sound came. The me on the bed opened its eyes, Mama's eyes, milky now, and smiled small. The door was locked from the inside, board still nailed over the window. I beat on the glass with fists that left no mark, watched the other me sit up, stretch, swing legs over the side. It stepped across the circle like the salt wasn't there, picked up the shotgun, and walked to the stove. Poured coffee from the pot I'd set to perk, steam curling lazy. I clawed at the door till my nails split, but the cabin held me out same as it once held things in. Snow started again, fat flakes sticking to the window. The other me rocked in Mama's chair, humming the lullaby she used to sing when fever kept me small. The tune was wrong notes flat, rhythm off like a hymn learned by a child who never heard it right. I huddled on the porch, frost biting my feet, watching through the glass. The circle stayed perfect, salt untouched. Night fell hard. The stove glowed, the humming never stopped. Sometimes the other me looked up, straight at the window, and waved like it saw me clear. I don't try the door anymore. Sit with my back to the wall, knees to chest, counting breaths that fog and vanish. The footprints come and go inside now, pacing slow from room to room. They grow heavier each night, boards sagging under the weight. The salt line holds, grains shining like new snow. I press my face to the glass and see myself inside, older now, hair gone white, rocking steady. The lullaby drifts out faint, calling me by a name I ain't answered in years. The snow keeps falling, covering Mama's grave, covering my tracks. I wait for the circle to break, for the door to open, for the weight to settle final. Till then I watch the fire burn low and the other me smile with my mouth, patient as the mountain itself.